I've always believed that patience is the strongest form of intelligence. You let people talk, you let them act smart, and you watch them show you who they really are. My name's Charles. I'm 70 years old, a retired engineer, and a widower for 6 years now. I raised my son, Luke, to be honest, hardworking, and thoughtful, the kind of man who'd treat people right no matter what. When he got married to a young woman named Vanessa, I was genuinely happy for him. She was sharp, confident, and ambitious, maybe a little too ambitious, but I thought that was just youthful energy. Luke adored her, so I welcomed her into the family with open arms. The first few months were fine, even warm. She'd call me Dad, bring me coffee when I visited, and always made sure to thank me for raising such a good man. But after a while, her tone started to shift. She'd interrupt me mid-story, correct me on things she barely knew about, and whenever I gave Luke advice, she'd smirk and say, "Don't worry, Charles. We've got it figured out." At first, I brushed it off. I've been around long enough to know pride when I see it. Still, something about the way she talked down to me bothered me. Not because she questioned me, but because I could see she was trying to prove something. Then one weekend, Luke invited me to stay with them for a few days. He said he wanted to show me the backyard project they were working on, building a deck. I used to design and supervise construction projects for a living, so I was curious to see how it was going. When I got there, I could tell Luke had done a good job so far, but I noticed a few errors. The support beams weren't properly aligned, and the drainage system wasn't set right. Nothing major, but problems that would catch up later. Over dinner, I mentioned it gently. I said, "You might want to reinforce those beams before you start laying the boards." Vanessa gave a tight smile and said, "Oh, Charles, don't worry." We followed a YouTube tutorial. "I think we're fine." I smiled back and said, "All right, just don't say I didn't warn you." The next day, while Luke was at work, Vanessa decided to keep building on her own. I offered to help, but she waved me off, saying, "I can handle it." "No offense, but your methods are kind of old-fashioned." That one stung. I'd spent my whole life perfecting those old-fashioned methods. But I stayed quiet and watched from the porch. A few hours later, I heard a loud crack followed by a scream. I rushed out and found her standing on the half-finished deck, staring down at a broken board and a snapped beam. Her foot had gone straight through one of the planks. She was lucky she didn't get seriously hurt. She looked up at me, embarrassed and angry. "This wood must be defective," she snapped. I looked at the joint, then back at her and said calmly, "No, it's not the wood, it's the foundation. You didn't secure it properly." She frowned, refusing to admit it. "Well, maybe your old techniques aren't that great either." I could have argued, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "All right then. Let's fix it your way." I helped her clean up the mess and went back inside. Later that evening, Luke came home, saw the damage, and immediately looked at me. I said nothing, just gave him a small nod toward Vanessa. He figured it out on his own the next morning. While Luke was at the hardware store getting replacement boards, Vanessa came into the kitchen and said, "Look, I know you think I'm stubborn." I smiled faintly and replied, "You're smart." But sometimes smart people forget that experience teaches things books and videos can't. She rolled her eyes and said, "I just don't like being told what to do." I chuckled. "Neither did I when I was your age. But the difference is, when someone tried to teach me, I listened first." She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and walked away. I didn't think much of it, but apparently that conversation stuck with her more than I realized. That evening, as Luke started working on the deck again, she joined him quietly. I sat nearby, sipping my coffee, watching them. This time, she didn't interrupt. She asked questions. "Should I drill this deeper? Does this angle look right?" It was a small change, but I noticed it. Luke smiled and said, "You know, Dad's been doing this stuff forever. You should listen to him. He's like a walking manual." She laughed softly and said, "Yeah, I guess he is." Something in her tone had changed. Less arrogance, more humility. I thought maybe that was the end of it. But life, as usual, had one more lesson waiting. A few weeks later, Luke invited the neighbors over for a small barbecue to show off the finished deck. It looked great, sturdy, level, and smooth. Everyone complimented it, and Luke proudly said, "Dad helped a lot." Vanessa smiled and said, "Yes, he did. Though I tried to outsmart him at first, and, well, the deck almost taught me a lesson the hard way." Everyone laughed, but I noticed something else, respect in her eyes for the first time. After dinner, when the guests left, she came to sit beside me on the porch. "Charles," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her and said, "For what?" She sighed. "For acting like I knew everything. I think I just wanted to prove I could handle things on my own. I didn't mean to be disrespectful." I smiled gently. "You weren't disrespectful, Vanessa. You were just trying to find your place. But let me tell you something. Strength doesn't come from doing everything alone. It comes from knowing when to accept help." She nodded, looking thoughtful. "I guess I forgot that." Then she said something that truly touched me. "You know, Luke always says he learned everything from you, how to fix things, how to stay calm, how to be patient. I thought I could impress you by showing I was just as capable, but instead I just came off like a fool." I chuckled softly. "You're not a fool, dear. You're just young. But don't forget, the man you married didn't teach himself. Every trick, every bit of patience he has, he learned from me." She smiled almost shyly and said, "Yeah, I see that now." From that day on, things were different. She started asking me for advice, not just about building or fixing things, but about life. How I managed my marriage, how I handled tough times, how I raised Luke. She'd sit with me on the porch in the evenings, and we'd talk for hours. I could see she wasn't trying to outsmart me anymore. She was trying to learn. And I'll admit, I admired that. It takes real strength to admit when you're wrong. A few months later, when they threw a small family gathering for my birthday, Vanessa stood up during dinner and gave a toast. She said, "To the man who taught my husband everything he knows and taught me something I didn't even realize I needed to learn. Humility." Everyone clapped, but I just sat there smiling, my heart full. She'd come a long way, you know. Sometimes the younger generation thinks they can outsmart the old one, but what they forget is, we taught them the very tools they're trying to use against us. Patience, logic, wisdom, those don't come from books or tutorials. They come from years of living, failing, and learning. And in the end, the ones who think they're outsmarting you often end up realizing they were just catching up. So if anyone ever tries to outthink you, don't argue. Just smile. Because sooner or later, life itself will remind them exactly who taught the lesson first.